City will no longer issue vouchers to migrants to pay for food, ending a controversial program that had repeatedly come under attack by conservatives and others.
This pilot program in New York City.
So, New York has canceled its controversial debit card program that gave asylum seekers $350 a week for food. And with the price of groceries in this city way above average, the controversy over these cards was never ending. But they were canceled within a day of President Trump winning re-election in a landslide. And the cancellation of this program just adds to the uncertainty many asylum seekers here are already facing, with the new president promising mass deportations.
The city began giving out 3,000 debit cards to roughly 900 migrant families in March. The cards, worth up to $350 per week, were designed to only be used for essential items like food and baby supplies.
The one-year contract provided what the city described as culturally relevant food. You may remember the food the city had been providing in migrant shelters was seen as not culturally sensitive to the needs of some migrant groups.
The influx of migrants is easing. In January, 4,000 arrived every week. Now, for every 600 who arrive, 1,400 leave.
Many of them are actually getting out on their own within 30 to 45 days after being able to integrate and find their own place to, rent a room.
We told you earlier about the expansion of the program in July to 7,300 migrant families, and critics argued the city-funded cards were unfair. And some Republicans expressed worries the debit cards would attract more undocumented immigrants to the city.
So the incredibly controversial prepaid debit card program is now over. But what nobody's talking about is this program was pretty much doomed to fail from the start, because not only do New York City's shelters provide 3 meals a day and unlimited continental snacks, cooking is banned inside the shelters themselves, and the cards were supposed to be used for groceries, making it hard to see exactly how the $1,400 monthly allotment families were given could be used to buy and prepare the healthy, culturally relevant foods that they were intended to. But what's really shocking here is the timing of this program's cancellation, because it was started almost a year ago, and then 4 months ago it was such a success that it was expanded to cover more families, and then within a day of the election it was just canceled. Which is weird, because our leaders kept defending this program by saying that the $1,400 prepaid cards were saving the city money and helping us help more asylum seekers than ever before. But the city's shelter system still evicts asylum seekers after 1 or 2 months, leaving many homeless, fending for themselves. At the same time, the number of asylum seekers in the city has dropped drastically ever since President Biden's executive action on the border. And with President Trump set to take office and start what he calls the largest deportation effort in U.S. history, the 700 people or so arriving here every week could continue to drop even lower. And that brings us to the real reason why these cards are now gone. President Trump's landslide election victory has signaled the end of the growth phase of the asylum crisis here in New York City. And Donald Trump's victory is also a huge victory for our progressive leaders, because it gives them all the cover they need to cancel expensive asylum seeker programs which don't actually help anybody, while placing the blame for the cancellation of those programs on a guy who hasn't been running the country for the last 4 years. But at the same time, our leaders, who are in cahoots with the businesses getting rich off our asylum crisis, don't want that crisis to completely go away, because it's allowed a sprawling network of abandoned warehouses and factories to generate generational wealth for their owners as shelters that aren't helping to lift anyone out of poverty. And as you're about to see, there is so much money at stake here that resistance to President Trump and his new immigration plans is pretty much guaranteed.
You got what?
So this tower right here behind me, this is the Row Hotel. It's a former luxury hotel that now operates as an emergency shelter for asylum seeker families here in Midtown. And not only does it make its owners millions of dollars a month because of the asylum crisis, this is also where this controversial debit card program has its origins. Because whistleblowers revealed that the city was throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars of prepared meals that were supposed to go to asylum seeker families, but because they weren't being eaten, they were just being disposed of, thrown in the trash. They weren't even being donated to some of the local homeless shelters around here. Video footage of the meals made it look like they were absolutely unedible, and the asylum seekers said that the food made them sick. The city fired back by saying the meals were of a perfectly edible and fine quality at $11 a piece. But because of all this food waste, the debit card program was conceived to lower the amount of food waste, because it was thought that by giving people a card that they could use to buy groceries, they wouldn't throw anything away that they just went out and bought, even though the preparing of non-ready-to-eat foods is banned inside shelters just like this.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams announced an end to a program providing prepaid debit cards to migrant families Thursday.
1 year, that was what it was in place for 1 year. Now we have moved away from emergency response because we have had a constant decrease in our population.
So Mayor Adams is right. This was a pilot program and it is now over, but coincidentally, it just so happens to have been canceled within a day of the election. And the entire time this program was operating, as controversial as it was, city leaders defended it as being necessary and as being great. And right before it was canceled back in July, it was expanded to cover even more families. So it looked like this program was going to go on forever, and then something changed. And observers are saying now that Donald Trump has regained the presidency, the asylum crisis may start drawing to a close as border security measures, which go beyond current security measures, are implemented. And as the number of new arrivals in the city starts to drop, the city will have every reason to say it doesn't need to maintain programs which are controversial and expensive. And by comparison, giving people a debit card they can use every week to buy maybe prepared food at like a buffet or something is much cheaper than throwing that food straight in the garbage and nobody eating it. And the meals that were going in the garbage were $11 a piece, which means one person, if they weren't eating any of this food, $33 in meals were going in the trash every day. A family of 4 who wasn't able to eat the food would lead to around $3,900 in wasted meals. But look at this, those airline meals that everybody hates and still eats, those only cost $4 each. And if the city wanted to pay $11 per meal and have a multitude of options, they could have just signed everybody up for Factor. The point is the whole meal program that was initially instituted at places like this was an absolute scam, and that scam was used to justify this debit card program that was also kind of a scam, it turns out, because it didn't work even though we were told it was working. But now that this program is gone, a lot of unanswered questions are on everyone's mind, like what are these families who were relying on them to feed themselves going to do now? And does this signal a change in the city's stance towards being a sanctuary city with a right to shelter? After all, many of the asylum seekers who live in places like this, they were invited in by city officials who promised them the American dream, and now things that were supposed to help them are being canceled. Does that signal that the city will no longer be a sanctuary at some point in the near future? This is something a lot of people are wondering.
The mayor called the program a success, citing reduced food waste and millions of dollars put into the local economy. We told you earlier about the expansion of the program in July to 7,300 migrant families. And critics argued the city-funded cards were unfair to...
Now, yes, this program was considerably cheaper than just throwing food straight in the trash. But one of the other criticisms of it was that it was so generous. There may have been people that said, gee, I'm going to go to New York to seek asylum instead of anywhere else because I can get the hotel and the debit card. And that kind of makes sense. Why would you seek asylum in a place that didn't provide those things, especially if you're fleeing poverty? And just as the program was called by some to be extremely unfair, it's also unfair for the city to set asylum seekers up, tell them they're going to take care of them, and then to cancel all of that stuff suddenly after saying that it was working, revealing that New York's asylum crisis, it's not managed in a way that is going to improve the lives of anybody except the people who run the businesses that are helping with the whole situation. For example, the owners of this hotel, they're making millions of dollars. The worst thing for them would be for the asylum crisis to end, because then the hotel wouldn't be fully booked for years on end. But as an emergency homeless shelter, it's not actually that great, because an emergency homeless shelter is supposed to be part of a larger goal of getting people back up on their feet. But after you move into a place like this, after 1 or 2 months, the city evicts you because it doesn't have unlimited space, and an unlimited number of people are coming here and also need a place to stay. And many of the folks that are here, yes, they're moving out, but to where, we don't truly know. We know some people are living in tents. That's not a great system. And now there's speculation that the cancellation of this program is pure politics, because had the election results been different, the number of arrivals in New York City would likely remain unchanged, and this program that was billed as the greatest thing since sliced bread would have probably been maintained. But with the electorate changing its mind about what it wants national immigration policy to look like, the program has suddenly disappeared. And the people in the shelters, they're starting to disappear as well, even though about 58,000 are still in the city's care.
The Merit is one of 2 shelter sites now closed down because the influx of migrants is easing. In January, 4,000 arrived every week. Now, for every 600 who arrive, 1,400 leave.
So yes, 1,400 people a month are leaving, but that's not some magical success story. The city has admitted they don't keep track of where people go, just that they were living in a shelter and now they don't. They don't know if these people are better off. They don't know where they're living. They have no idea. But obviously, if the city expected to continue receiving high numbers of new arrivals, they would not be closing down facilities that are meant to house those people and take care of them, because that's what the law here says we have to do. Yet the city is taking this opportunity to drastically decrease the number of shelters that it has. They're even closing down the massive 3,000 person facility on Randall's Island that has been plagued by controversy and has gang members reportedly using it as a home base to commit crime all over town. Which is another issue altogether. How helpful can these shelters really be if bad people are living inside of them? People who are members of a gang that profits from human exploitation. This is a massive problem, to have a humanitarian crisis infiltrated by human exploiters. That's not only a massive problem for the people living inside these facilities who have little kids and now have to wonder if the criminal underworld will try and recruit them, but it's also a problem for the entire city, because how can we harbor gang members and fugitives and keep them safe in a place where law enforcement is not allowed to enter? Police, they can't even go inside these places. That's why you have a cruiser parked out front. That's as close as they can get to put forth a law enforcement presence. And with reports coming out about weapons finding their way inside these facilities, many people want to see the police doing more, but they can't. It's illegal. Because as a sanctuary city, we've got this idea that somehow law enforcement and immigration are toxic to each other. But since we think that way, many of the same people who fled poverty and fled crime are finding the same criminals in the places that are supposed to help them get back on their feet. That's not a good system at all for anybody. Nobody should have to live in a place like that that is actually more dangerous or just as dangerous as where they came from. Yet now, because of who it is that wants to do something about this, local opposition to any new immigration efforts is growing, without realizing that these resistance efforts are really just supporting the criminals who are ruining the lives of asylum seekers who this crisis is named after. So in just a few weeks, the criminals, gang members, and terror watch list suspects who've escaped into America and aren't supposed to be here, they're gonna have to start watching their backs, because the incoming president has promised that they will be the focus of his deportation efforts. And when you consider that many of these cartels and gangs have been exploiting people since before they even entered this country, their removal from it is gonna be a good thing for the law-abiding asylum seekers, as well as the middle-income communities around New York that have been overtaken by crime, which has come from these gangs in many cases. Yet somehow, not everybody agrees that securing the border and getting rid of the bad guys is a good idea.
I have arguments a lot up on Capitol Hill. Give me one downside on secure border. What's the downside unless people on terrorist watch list coming across the border? A secure border saves lives. A country can't have strong national security if we don't have border security. We gotta know who's coming in, what's coming in, where's coming in, why it's coming in.
I guess the only downsides to a secure border is that they hurt those who profit from the asylum crisis, both the gangs that are smuggling people into the country and the businesses here in New York that are getting rich off of all this while not actually helping rehabilitate people. And apparently these cartels have a $13 billion a year industry bringing people into the country for money. That's massive. Of course they're going to be upset about it. Their whole industry is going to get shut down, as it should. And it's providing our local criminals here who profit off the exploitation of their fellow asylum seekers with an unlimited number of potential victims and new recruits for their gangs. Because every week you've still got 700 to 1,000 people arriving here who need a place to stay. And they're going to get it because right to shelter is the law of the land. And what's crazy is even though New York City has all of these laws that were set up in the name of compassion and caring for people, they create an environment which does the opposite of that, because criminals are exploiting these sanctuary city policies that hide them from the federal government and our soft on crime laws that release criminals when they do things like shoplift or rob and assault others. At the same time, we've already had our fair share of protests from people claiming that the new president's plans are anti-immigrant plans. And these protesters make no differentiation between people who might be here in a law-abiding capacity and people who might be gang members looking to prey upon those who have nothing. And that's just the gang portion of this. You've got people getting off buses here at the bus terminal who are on terror watch lists. Who knows what their plans are? And it's a good thing that someone's finally going to try to track these folks down.
The priorities for the deportation operation are public safety threats and national security threats. Last time I looked at the data, we have over 700,000 that have a criminal conviction and a final order that are walking the streets. So, we got that. That's a priority. And national security threats, those that...
So when this deportation agenda kicks off, families and the law-abiding will not be the focus of it because there aren't the resources available to focus on every single person who might be in the country in a capacity that is not 100% official. ICE only has around 6,000 agents who can act in a deportation capacity at this moment. And with some experts saying there are over 700,000 criminals in this country, they're going to be busy for quite some time. But here's what most people don't know. This could pose a risk to New York City because as this crackdown begins, certain areas of the country are going to cooperate with it, and other areas of the country, like this one in particular, are going to resist it at a local level. And you may have people who are wanted by the federal government who specifically try to come to New York because it's a place where they can kind of hide out and avoid federal law enforcement. That would be a bad thing, and it would probably be a really bad thing considering that this city has decided it's going to remain a sanctuary and may end up protecting people who want to do harm to others in some manner. All the while, protesters who claim to have the best interest of asylum seekers and law-abiding immigrants at heart are giving cover to these criminals by protesting on their behalf because they're the ones that are the target of this new deportation effort once it starts. What do you think about that? Would this end up being a good thing for New York City to get rid of some of the criminals that live in our shelters, that live next to families who have small kids who may be approved for asylum and may be on their way to beginning new lives in this country? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.